The red carpet message was simple. Grab your friends, wear your florals. Then came the drink menu. At the bar, a sugar-rimmed pink cocktail carried the name of the character whose harmful actions drive It Ends With Us. The Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni film sold as a story about surviving a harmful relationship and breaking cycles. That disconnect was the warning sign. A campaign had turned pain into an aesthetic, then asked audiences to call it empowerment. Before anyone could talk about the film, the real question was already waiting. When Hollywood packages pain, who gets to write the truth? The red carpet did not ask viewers to sit with discomfort. It asked them to dress up. Across the press tour for It Ends With Us, the surface language was bright, social, and easy to sell. Blake Lively appeared before cameras in floral looks, polished hair, and the kind of smile built for magazine covers. Beneath that polished image was a story about a harmful relationship, emotional and physical risk, and the slow choice to survive. The campaign around it often felt like a summer outing. That was the first fracture. A story carrying psychological weight was wrapped in the codes of a girl's night out. The audience was not asked to prepare for a painful subject. They were given the same invitation again. Make it social, make it pretty, make it easy to sell. To critics, that line made the film sound closer to a romantic comedy than a story built around surviving harm. It did not matter whether the phrase was meant as light promotion or brand shorthand. On camera, it softened the sharpest part of the material. It turned the flower shop aesthetic into the main event, while the darker reason for the story sat in the background. The mismatch did not stop at the clothes. It moved into the product table. During the same promotional cycle, the film's attention overlapped with Blake Brown, Lively's hair care line, and Betty Buzz, her drink brand. The result was a press tour where interviews, fashion coverage, product placement, and serious messaging began to blur. For some viewers, the problem was not that an actress had other businesses. The problem was the collision. A film marketed around survival was also being used as a platform for beauty and beverage branding. That collision became impossible to ignore at the bar. At an after-party tied to the film, guests encountered themed drinks. One cocktail was called Ryle, You Wait. The name played on Ryle, the character whose actions sit at the center of Lily's story. On paper, it may have looked like wordplay. In context, it landed differently. A character associated with control and harm had been turned into a sweet, photogenic drink. That was the physical object critics could point to. Not a vague complaint about tone, not a social media overreaction, a printed menu, a glass, a branded beverage, a painful narrative converted into something designed to be held, photographed, and consumed. The image was hard to defend because it exposed the campaign's blind spot. The film asked audiences to care about a woman recognizing danger. The marketing asked them to enjoy the vibe. One language belonged to survival, the other belonged to lifestyle content. Put together, they made the movie feel less like a difficult story being handled with care and more like an aesthetic package looking for maximum reach. Then came the interview moment that turned discomfort into backlash. A journalist asked Lively how viewers who connected with the film's heavier themes could approach her in public. It was a practical question and an emotional one. Some audience members were not coming to the movie as casual fans. They were bringing private history into the theater. They might see Lily's story and feel exposed, shaken, or seen. The expected answer did not need to be perfect. It only needed to acknowledge the weight of the question. Instead, Lively responded with a joke about giving out her address, her phone number, or sharing her location. The clip spread because the gap was so clear. The question was about vulnerable audiences seeking connection. The answer sounded like a celebrity protecting personal space through sarcasm. Then the tone shifted. Intent is difficult to prove. A joke can be nervous. A press tour can be exhausting. A short clip can flatten context. But reputation does not wait for nuance. Once the footage moved across social platforms, viewers judged the moment by what it felt like. To many, it felt dismissive. That feeling became the real damage. The audience most likely to care about the film's message began to ask whether the campaign cared about them at all. Were they viewers being respected or consumers being targeted? Were they being invited into a story about survival or recruited into a brand event with floral dresses and sponsored drinks? By the end of the press cycle, the mask was still bright. The gowns still photographed well. The product still had shelf appeal, but the foundation underneath had shifted. The public had seen the first contradiction in this image battle. A project selling healing, while its marketing appeared to flatten pain into a theme. To understand why that contradiction grew so large, the camera has to leave the pastel carpet and move back to the first boundaries crossed on set. That is where the power map begins. Power rarely walks onto a film set and grabs the director's chair in public. It starts smaller. With the boundaries, people are too polite to defend. In production, costume is not decoration. It is character work. The wardrobe department builds class, mood, damage, and denial. A jacket can tell viewers what a character refuses to say. A pair of shoes can show whether she is hiding, performing, or trying to survive. According to Baldoni's side of the dispute, that system became an early pressure point on It Ends With Us. The costume process around Blake Lively's character was described not as a department workflow, but as a space where star power began to push against the crew's control. The image was small but sharp, racks that should have represented a shared visual plan under the shadow of a separate authority. In the filing's version of events, clothing was not a harmless preference. It became a signal. If the chain of command could be bent around wardrobe, then the question was no longer about taste. It was about who could overrule the people hired to make the film. That is how a power map forms. Not through one dramatic explosion, but through repeated exceptions. The star has a view, the department adjusts, the director absorbs the pressure, the crew learns where the real gravity sits. Before anyone says the word takeover, the set has started behaving like one. Then came the rooftop scene. This was not a throwaway exchange. It was the first meeting between Lily and Ryle. The scene that teaches viewers how to read their chemistry before the story turns darker. If that scene changes, the emotional contract of the film changes with it. Baldoni's filings say Lively asked to take a pass at the scene, then delivered pages that moved far from the approved version. His side framed the moment as a breach in the usual creative process. Lively later said in a red carpet interview that Ryan Reynolds, her husband, had written the iconic rooftop scene. The screenwriter, Christy Hall, later said she had understood some of those additions as possible improvisations, not a separate rewrite. After that, The scene carried a different weight. A scene can survive improvisation. A film set can absorb suggestions. But when a major scene is publicly credited to someone outside the formal writing structure, it raises a colder question. Who was steering the script? The timing made the question sharper. The production period soon collided with the Writers Guild strike, when writers across Hollywood were fighting over credit, pay, and protections. Reporting later noted that the alleged work on the scene may have happened before the strike began, so it should not be stated as proven strike-breaking. But the optics were combustible. A powerful husband without formal writing credit was suddenly attached to a key scene during a labor moment built around invisible writing. For people lower in the hierarchy, that is the kind of detail that stings. The guild fight was about writers being replaced, minimized, or erased. Here was a drama carrying sensitive material, now surrounded by questions about whose words were making it onto the page and whose authority could be bypassed. Baldoni's side cast the rooftop dispute as more than a creative disagreement. In their telling, it was the moment the director learned that his title did not guarantee control. He could stand near the monitors. He could block the scene. He could carry the public responsibility of directing the film, but the writing, tone, and emotional temperature were being pulled by forces larger than the official call sheet. That is the quiet humiliation of losing authority on set. It does not look like a shouting match. It can look like polite notes, revised pages, and a room full of people pretending the hierarchy still exists. The director remains visible, but his power starts to thin. A safer version of the story has to keep the legal frame clear. These were contested claims filtered through filings, interviews, and later reporting. Lively's side disputed Baldoni's broader narrative and argued that the conflict cannot be separated from her workplace-related concerns. That gave the moment a sharper charge. But inside the public case file, the wardrobe fight and rooftop rewrite gave Baldoni's side a clean argument to present. Creative control had slipped away long before the public saw the first crack. By the end of this phase, the movie had not yet become a legal battlefield. It had not reached the red carpet freeze-out, the social media trial, or the crisis PR machinery. The damage was quieter. A director was still in place, but the room around him had begun to move without him. To understand how that pressure hardened, the camera has to leave the set and enter the private room where praise could feel like a warning. The pressure did not move into a boardroom. According to Wayfarer's filings, it moved into a private apartment, a space where professional rules could start to feel smaller. Baldoni's side described the meeting as a turning point in the rooftop scene dispute. The scene had already become more than a question of dialogue. It had become a question of control. Who could alter the emotional opening of Lily and Ryle's relationship? Who could decide whether a director's hesitation counted as judgment, resistance, or disrespect? In a studio office, those questions would have carried a formal shape. Producers could speak. Lawyers could listen. The chain of command would at least be visible. Inside a private home, the balance looked different. The host controls the room. The guest enters someone else's world. The meeting may still sound creative, but the space itself changes the temperature. The location mattered because it removed Baldoni from the space where his title carried weight. On set, he was the director. In that apartment, according to the way his side later framed it, he was a man being asked to respond inside the personal territory of a much stronger celebrity circle. The filing says Lively had asked to take a pass at the rooftop scene and sent pages that differed sharply from the earlier version. Baldoni replied with a careful note. He praised her passion, but suggested the final scene might land somewhere between her draft and the original. It was a diplomatic answer, designed to keep production moving without surrendering the whole script. But diplomacy can sound like rejection when the room is built around power. According to the court summary of the Wayfarer allegations, Lively then asked Baldoni to come to her apartment. There, Reynolds and a famous friend praised Lively's version of the scene. The filing later points to Baldoni's own text, where he told Lively that her writing made the scene more fun and interesting, and that he would have felt that way without Ryan and Taylor. From that point on, the scene carried a different kind of pressure, one that did not need a shouted threat. Ryan Reynolds was not an anonymous spouse giving notes at a kitchen table. He was one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Taylor Swift was not a casual friend in the corner. She represented a level of cultural force that can move press cycles and public mood without touching a legal document. Their praise may have been sincere. It may have been friendly support for Lively. It may have been an informal, creative conversation among people who knew each other well. A fair script has to leave that possibility open. But image battles are built on perception, not just intention. And that perception is layered through PR strategies, legal maneuvering, and algorithmic reach. From Baldoni's side, the room looked like a wall of celebrity consensus. If he pushed back, he was no longer responding to one actor's pages. He was risking conflict with a network of fame much larger than the film. That is the colder version of pressure. Nobody has to say, take the draft or suffer the consequences. The hierarchy is already in the room. A director can know he has the formal title and still feel the limits of that title closing in. The emotional mechanics are simple. First, remove the disagreement from a neutral space. Then surround the disputed idea with people whose approval carries public weight. Then turn hesitation into a personal wound. The question is no longer, does this scene serve the film? The question becomes, why are you failing to see what everyone else in this room can see? The danger is what happens when praise starts functioning like pressure. Spoken softly, it still narrows the exit. The more enthusiastic the room becomes, the harder dissent sounds. A director who objects risks sounding insecure, ungrateful, or threatened by a star's creativity. Silence in that situation can look like consent. Consent can become precedent. Under the warm apartment light, the pressure had a clean shape. A filmmaker did not need to be ordered into surrender. He only had to calculate the cost of refusal. One disagreement over pages had become a test of whether he could survive the circle around the star. That exchange is the whole conflict in miniature. One side saw recognition. The other saw pressure. One side saw support. The other saw the director's authority being crowded out by people who did not hold his job. By the time the meeting ended, nothing needed to be broken on the table. The shift was quieter than that. A boundary had been tested, softened, and made personal for him right there. The meeting closed, but the feeling did not. Days later, the pressure would leave the room and reappear on a phone screen, this time in writing. with no room to misread. The message did not arrive like a formal production note. It arrived as a block of language, personal, wounded, and loaded with names that outweighed the scene. By this point, the rooftop dispute had moved through several rooms. Baldoni had tried to answer Lively's draft without rejecting it outright. He had praised her passion, then later praised the writing itself. According to the filings, that first response landed badly. What he saw as diplomacy, she read as being minimized. Then came the text that became a strange artifact in the narrative machine. Baldoni's lawsuit cited an alleged message in which Lively compared herself to Khaleesi from Game of Thrones. In that same message, she described having dragons who protected the people she fought for. Reports understood those dragons as references to Ryan Reynolds and Taylor Swift, though the text became part of a contested legal narrative, not a finding of fact. The message should not be treated as proven intimidation by a court. It was an alleged exchange presented by Baldoni's side to support its version of events. CNN noted that it had not independently verified the messages contained in the lawsuits. That boundary matters. But even with that legal caution, the language was explosive. Khaleesi is not a neutral metaphor. It brings images of command, loyalty, fire, protection, and conquest. Dragons are not helpers. They are instruments of force. When that language appears inside a dispute over creative control, it changes the texture of the conversation. A disagreement about pages begins to sound like a map of power. In Baldoni's reading, the message was not a quirky pop culture reference. It was a reminder of the people standing behind Lively. Reynolds was her husband and one of the most powerful actors in Hollywood. Swift was one of the most dominant cultural figures alive. Their names did not need to be weaponized in plain language to change the pressure. Their proximity alone could do that. That is why Gorgeous Monsters traveled so fast online. It sounded glamorous, but underneath it carried a harsher implication. Beautiful forces with the power to protect, punish, and reshape the public mood. To fans, it may have sounded loyal. To Baldoni's side, it sounded like a warning wrapped in affection. One text cannot prove an entire conspiracy. The reputation machine runs on signals, PR timing, legal framing, and public repetition. A name dropped at the right moment, a friend invoked in the right tone, a message read as support by one side and pressure by the other. Lively's side could frame the message as frustration from a woman who felt overlooked and was finally being backed by people who believed in her. Baldoni's side could frame the same message as a show of force from a star surrounded by allies too powerful to challenge. Both readings could live inside the same text. That is what made it dangerous. For a director already worried about losing creative control, the effect would be hard to miss. He was not only debating a scene, he was calculating the cost of being seen as the person who failed to recognize Lively's contribution. He was weighing a script note against the public gravity of the names around her. A normal production disagreement gives people room to argue. This one seemed to narrow the room. Every answer carried a second meaning. Praise could sound forced. Hesitation could sound insulting. Silence could be mistaken for agreement. The more personal the conflict became, the less room remained for professional judgment. From there, the story moved into a different register. Authority thins out, not in one dramatic surrender, but through a series of small recalculations. You stop asking whether the scene is right. You start asking whether the argument is worth the blast radius. You stop defending every boundary. You begin choosing which ones you can afford to lose. In the story Baldoni's team later told, the dragon's text marked the moment the power imbalance became impossible to ignore. It placed celebrity influence into written form. It turned a creative disagreement into evidence for a public theory that the film's control had moved away from the director and toward a circle of stars around Lively. Lively's allegations against Baldoni and Wayfarer told a different story about workplace-related concerns and retaliation. But for the reputation battle, the damage was done. The metaphor had escaped the phone. Once a message like that becomes public, it stops belonging to the sender. It becomes a symbol. The cameras would stop rolling, the set would clear. But if the script could be pulled by invisible gravity, the finished film could be pulled too. The next fight would not happen beside the monitors. It would happen in the edit, behind closed doors far from set. Filming ended, but control did not settle. It moved into the edit, the quietest room in any movie war. The editing bay is where a film learns what it has become. Performances are shortened. Silences are extended. A glance can turn tender, guilty, or dangerous, depending on where the cut lands. For a story like It Ends With Us, that room mattered. The difference between romance and warning could live inside a pause. Directors normally get private time to assemble their cut. According to Wayfarer's filings, Baldoni began that process after production, while Lively asked for access to footage and early scenes. What started as collaboration in his side's telling stretched into something larger. She was invited into the editing process for a limited period. The involvement expanded. Then, in spring of 2024, Sony allowed Lively to create her own version of the film. That move changed the conflict. Notes are normal. Actor feedback is normal. A producer weighing in is normal. But a competing full cut from the lead actress is not a casual adjustment. It turns the edit from a creative conversation into a referendum on authority. Public reporting later said Lively commissioned her version from editor Shane Reed, known for work connected to Deadpool and Wolverine. From there, the post-production fight gained a sharper edge. To Baldoni's side, the same circle of celebrity influence that had hovered around the script now seemed to enter post-production. The movie was no longer being shaped through one chain of command. It had two centers of gravity. According to Wayfarer's account, Baldoni believed Lively's edit would supplement his work. Instead, the process moved toward two competing versions. The filings allege Lively replaced the film's editors and composer with her own choices, while Sony supported those demands. The dispute was no longer about a scene. It was about which film audiences would be allowed to see. In post-production, that is not a small shift. It is a new command structure for the film. Then came the test screenings. In Hollywood, audience testing can become the closest thing to a neutral witness. Executives sit in the dark, collect scores, and pretend the numbers can remove ego from the room. For a moment, it looked as if the argument would be solved by strangers with scorecards. Wayfarer's filing says both versions were tested. It also says Baldoni's cut scored higher with most key demographics, while Lively's version scored higher only with men who were not the target audience. That claim became central to Baldoni's side of the story. In their telling, the data favored the director's version, yet the power map still pointed somewhere else. Lively's side had a different public frame. Her version was described by allies and some reporting as the version Sony selected, the one that reached theaters and became a commercial success. An image battle is never fought over one spreadsheet. It is fought over what each side says the spreadsheet means, layered through settlement narratives and public perception. Wayfarer's complaint alleged that Lively refused to promote the film unless her cut was used. People reported that Baldoni claimed Lively said Colleen Hoover would side with her if her version was not selected. Other reporting said Sony told Wayfarer that Lively and the cast would not promote the movie unless her cut moved forward. These were contested claims, but they created a clear narrative for Baldoni's side. The edit was decided less by scores than by leverage. So the director stood down. The final version that moved toward release was tied to Lively's cut, though Wayfarer's filings also say Sony persuaded her to put much of Baldoni's work back in. This part needs precision because it complicates the simple takeover story. The finished movie was not easy to assign to one side. It was the product of conflict, compromise, pressure, and studio calculation. But the credit fight was not finished. Lively sought the PGA mark on her producer credit, a designation associated with having performed major producing work on a film. Wayfarer and Baldoni disputed whether she had earned it. According to the filing, they eventually sent a support letter after feeling trapped by the stakes around promotion, Sony, and the money already invested. That letter became the paper trail. It did not say men with power were dragged at gunpoint. It said they felt boxed in. For an online court, that is the important phrase. Not force, leverage. By the end of post-production, the battle had moved through wardrobe, pages, private rooms, messages, test scores, and credit forms. The film had a final cut. Lively had producer recognition. Baldoni still had his name on the project, but the frame around that name had narrowed. Now the machine was ready for public view, and in New York, under flashbulbs and velvet ropes, that private power map would become visible. August 6th, 2024. The premiere in New York was supposed to make the film look whole. That is what red carpets are built to do. They turn messy productions into clean pictures. They place stars shoulder to shoulder, frame the cast as a family, and give photographers proof that whatever happened behind closed doors has been resolved for the cameras. But the images from It Ends With Us did not read that way. Lively arrived inside a bright center of attention, surrounded by Ryan Reynolds, castmates, producers, and Colleen Hoover. The visual language was warm and crowded. People leaned in. Cameras flashed on cue. The film looked, at least on one side of the carpet, like a celebration moving around its star. Baldoni occupied a different frame. Public reporting noted that he did not appear to pose with Lively at the New York premiere. He was not photographed in the same easy cluster with the principal cast. Time reported that he appeared to pose with his wife and friends, while Lively was photographed with her own group and co-stars. E! News noted the same gap. The director was not pictured with the cast in the way audiences expect at a world premiere. A director can be excluded in many ways during production. On a red carpet, exclusion becomes architecture. Viewers can see who stands near whom. They can see which bodies form the center and which body sits outside it. To be careful, the pictures alone do not prove why the separation happened. Red carpets are choreographed, crowded, and chaotic. Schedules move. Publicists intervene. A missing group photo is not by itself evidence of a plot. But public battles do not need courtroom proof to begin. They need an image that feels wrong. This one did. And because the film had been sold as empathy, the visual coldness felt sharper. A story about recognizing harm was now surrounded by a silence everyone could photograph, clip, and replay that night. The digital layer made the image harder to ignore. Around the same period, fans noticed that members of the cast in Hoover did not appear to follow Baldoni on Instagram, while he appeared to follow them. And the audience noticed. Time, E! News, and other outlets reported that social media users were treating those follow lists as clues. Wayfarer's later filing went further, alleging that Lively, Reynolds, and other cast members unfollowed Baldoni, and that Lively encouraged others to shun him. Here, the wording has to stay careful. That is an allegation. It should be named as one. But the public did not wait for discovery. Online, the unfollow became a signal. In the language of modern celebrity, a follow is not friendship, but an unfollow can look like a verdict. That is how quiet digital power works. Nobody has to release a statement. Nobody has to accuse anyone on the record. A cast can appear to withdraw from a director in silence, and the internet will do the translation. Screenshots become testimony. Absence becomes evidence. Social media became its own press room. For Baldoni, the visible result was isolation. While the larger cast orbit appeared to gather around Lively, he moved through interviews with a controlled tone. He did not use the carpet to attack her. He did not turn the premiere into a counteroffensive. In public clips and interviews, he kept praising the film and speaking about the story's heavier purpose. That restraint became part of the contrast. On one side, a crowded celebrity tableau. On the other, the director performing calm inside a storm he could not name. Whether viewers trusted him or not, the optics carried weight. The man credited with directing the film looked separated from the film's public family. This is where the media battlefield entered its public trial phase. The audience did not yet have full lawsuits, exhibits, rulings, or leaked timelines. They had body language. They had missing photos. They had Instagram follows. They had a press tour where one of the central creative figures seemed to be standing outside his own movie. That was enough for speculation to harden. The floral marketing from earlier now looked different. The smiles looked less like promotion and more like cover. Every old interview, every paused glance, every awkward red carpet angle became part of a growing case file built by viewers in real time. Still, the premiere did not answer the central question. It only exposed the fracture. It showed that whatever had happened behind the scenes had survived the edit, survived the marketing plan, and reached the carpet intact. The cameras captured the separation, but not the deepest humiliation alleged by Baldoni's side, because when the stars moved toward the main screening room, the director was sent somewhere else. The public separation did not end when the cameras stopped. According to Wayfarer's filings, it continued inside the building, away from the carpet, away from the main crowd, and away from the room where the film was being celebrated. The allegation is precise enough to matter. Wayfarer claimed that Lively had threatened to boycott the premiere if Baldoni attended in the normal way. Sony and Wayfarer, the filing says, worked out a compromise. Baldoni and his guests could attend, but they would arrive before Lively and leave the red carpet when she appeared. That is not the kind of compromise audiences imagine at a world premiere. A premiere sells unity. It tells viewers the artists survived the process and can stand beside the work together. Here, the compromise itself became a signal. The film could have its director present, but not in the same frame, not in the same rhythm, and not in the same public space as its lead star. Then the movement went indoors. Wayfarer's filing says that when Lively arrived, Baldoni and his group were required to leave the red carpet. Security escorted them away from the main flow of the event and into a makeshift area in the basement with folding tables and chairs. The detail is not glamorous. One side of the premiere had gowns, lights, photographers, and a crowd trained to applaud. The other side, if the filing is accurate, had fluorescent practicality and the feeling of being parked out of sight. A basement is not neutral. It changes the emotional meaning of the night. Above ground, the movie becomes a cultural event. Below, the director becomes a problem to be managed. The allegation does not need decoration. The contrast does the work. Here, the alleged humiliation, as Baldoni's side framed it, became physical. The issue was no longer only missing photos or unfollows. It was logistics, routes, doors, timing, security instructions. The same industry that knows how to build a perfect image also knows how to remove a person from one. Here, precision matters. Lively's side disputed Baldoni and Wayfarer's broader narrative. The court later noted that Wayfarer had not shown certain legal damages from the premiere separation. That does not erase the image, but it keeps the script honest. The basement story is not a final ruling about guilt. It is an allegation that became powerful because it matched what viewers had already seen on the carpet: distance, avoidance, and a director standing outside his film. According to the court summary, Baldoni's group was later allowed to watch the film in a separate theater after the main theater had been cleared of Lively and her guests. It was not described as one room where everyone eventually mixed. It was separation carried into the screening itself. For a filmmaker, a premiere screening is supposed to be the emotional release valve. Years of development, production stress, test screenings, revisions, and press pressure all compress into that first audience reaction. You hear the laughs, you feel the silence. You learn whether the room is with you. In this version of events, Baldoni did not experience that alongside the cast and author. He watched from elsewhere with his own group after being routed away from the visible celebration. The work was on screen, but the communal recognition around it had been split apart. That is the coldest part of the image. Not that a celebrity was denied applause, not that a director missed a party. It is that the ritual of authorship was broken. The man whose name appeared as director could be present at the premiere, yet still appear absent from the film's public life. When the screening ended, the filing says the separation continued. Baldoni's group was routed away to avoid contact with Lively and her guests. In reputation terms, that final routing mattered as much as the red carpet. It told a story without saying a word. Proximity itself had become a risk. By then, the premiere had stopped functioning as promotion. It had become evidence. To fans watching clips online, every movement looked loaded. Why was he not with the cast? Why was he not introducing the film? Why did the night seem arranged around keeping people apart? Those questions created the next opening for the press. A missing director can be explained away. A director separated from his own premiere is harder to ignore. The basement allegation gave the story a scene, not a rumor, not a mood, but a location. And once a public battle has a location, the public imagination does the rest. The official lights went down. The applause moved upstairs. But the strangest image of the night lived below the celebration. By morning, reporters and online sleuths were searching for the real reason. By the time the press started asking why the premiere looked so divided, the conflict had moved beyond body language. It needed documents. Lively's side went first with a legal complaint that reframed the story. The public had read the tour as a mystery about creative control and awkward photos. Her filing asked viewers to look somewhere else, toward alleged workplace-related concerns, alleged boundary violations, and an alleged retaliation effort after she raised concerns. The complaint included claims about conduct on set, including on-set boundaries, and comments Lively's side described as inappropriate. One disputed detail involved a lifting scene. Reporting said Baldoni had asked a trainer about Lively's weight before filming, and that Lively felt the inquiry was humiliating. Baldoni's side denied that it was uncomfortable commentary aimed at her body. His later response said he had chronic back problems and asked discreetly, through a trainer, to avoid injury during a scripted lift. This is why reputation evidence is so unstable. The same fact can be made to carry two meanings. In Lively's framing, the question became part of a pattern of discomfort and disrespect. In Baldoni's framing, it was a safety calculation turned into a public accusation. The audience was not watching the moment itself. It was watching two legal teams build competing meanings around it. Then the complaint widened from the set to the media. Lively alleged that Baldoni and Wayfarer used crisis communications professionals to damage her reputation after she raised workplace-related concerns. Her complaint cited text messages among publicists and crisis advisors, including Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel. The phrase that detonated across the press was not polished legal language. It was blunt, ugly, and made for headlines. We can bury anyone. That line changed the weather around the case. Until then, many online viewers had treated the backlash against Lively as organic punishment for a tone-deaf press tour. The complaint suggested a darker possibility, that some online hostility may have been shaped by professional operators. Baldoni and Wayfarer denied that framing. They argued the messages were stripped of context and that Lively's side was using the press to reverse a wave of criticism she had created through her own marketing choices. In their telling, the real narrative machine was being aimed at him. That is when the fight became symmetrical. One side said a woman raised concerns and was punished through a PR machine. The other said a director was falsely turned into a villain to protect a star's image and control of the film. Both stories use the same vocabulary: harm, retaliation, manipulation, evidence, truth. Both sides claimed the moral high ground. Both sides claimed the other was manufacturing reality. The arrival of Melissa Nathan made the battle feel industrial. Public reporting described her as a crisis PR specialist. Once her name entered the story, the conflict no longer looked like celebrity gossip. It looked like a case study in how reputation defense gets outsourced to professionals who understand timing, outlets, and online pressure. Baldoni's side answered with legal escalation. He denied Lively's allegations and filed a countersuit worth $400 million against Lively, Ryan Reynolds, and publicist Leslie Sloan, accusing them of defamation, civil extortion, and trying to damage his professional standing. He also sued the New York Times separately, arguing its reporting on Lively's complaint had misrepresented the communications. Then his team took a step built for the internet age. They launched a website called the Lawsuit Info. It linked to court filings and a timeline running 168 pages, filled with texts meant to support Baldoni's version of the story. Lively's lawyers criticized the move as an effort to influence public perception and potential jurors. Baldoni's lawyer said the point was to let people see materials he believed contradicted her claims. That website changed the format of the war. A complaint was no longer only something filed with a court clerk. It became content. Receipts became navigation tabs. Private messages became shareable evidence. The public no longer had to wait for a trial to feel like it was reviewing exhibits. But more access did not mean more clarity. It meant more ammunition. Every screenshot could be cut, captioned, defended, or reframed. Every message could become proof of cruelty to one audience and proof of context to another. The legal process had entered the file. The public process had entered the feed. By the end of this phase, the story was no longer about why two stars avoided each other at a premiere. It had become a machinery question. Who built the narrative? Who leaked first? Who planted which idea? Who benefits when the audience believes one version over another? The lawyers had entered the room. The crisis teams had drawn the map. But the fastest court in America was not federal. It was the feed. Courtrooms move slowly. The feed does not wait for evidence to mature. It grabs a shape, tests the mood, and turns suspicion into a public ritual. After the legal filings entered the conversation, platforms stopped treating the "It Ends With Us" controversy as a press tour mystery. They treated it like an open case. Clips were slowed down. Red carpet angles were replayed. Interview answers were clipped into pieces small enough to travel. A pause became a theory. A smile became a motive. A missing glance became evidence. That does not mean the internet was right. It means the internet was fast. And speed, in a celebrity scandal, can harden into consensus before the first correction arrives. Crisis teams can brief reporters, lawyers can file motions, studios can write careful statements, but the algorithmic cycle works with different tools: rhythm, outrage, recognition, and repetition. If a clip feels like it confirms what viewers already suspect, it moves before anyone can stop it. For Lively, the problem was that the new clips did not arrive alone. They attached themselves to older material. The first resurfaced fragment came from 2016. Norwegian journalist Kjersti Flye uploaded an old Café Society interview with Lively and Parker Posey under a title saying it made her want to quit her job. The clip spread during the "It Ends With Us" backlash, and viewers watched it through the lens of everything that had happened since. In the interview, Flye congratulated Lively on her pregnancy. Lively replied with a pointed little bump remark back at the journalist. Later, when Flye asked about the film's costumes, Lively redirected the question toward whether male actors would be asked the same thing. Much of the conversation then seemed to move between Lively and Posey, leaving Flay visibly outside the exchange. The clip was not part of the film dispute. It did not prove anything about the set, the edit, or the lawsuits. But reputation does not organize evidence by relevance. It organizes evidence by pattern. To supporters of Lively, the old interview was being weaponized at a convenient moment. They argued the pregnancy comment from the reporter was awkward and that the costume question may have touched a familiar double standard women face in press junkets. To critics, the clip showed something else: status, coldness, and a celebrity making a working journalist feel small. After that, the audience could no longer read the moment the same way. It gave both sides material. One side saw unfair piling on, the other saw confirmation. Then the algorithm dug deeper into older criticism. Lively and Ryan Reynolds had married in 2012 at Boone Hall in South Carolina, a former plantation. The choice had been criticized before, and Reynolds later apologized publicly, saying they had made a serious mistake, and later married again at home. That apology mattered. It showed the couple had acknowledged the harm. But once the "it ends with us" backlash gained speed, the plantation wedding returned as part of a broader reputation file. Old criticism of Lively's lifestyle site, Preserve, returned with it. The site had once published a fashion spread titled Allure of Antebellum, a phrase many readers found disturbing because it romanticized Southern aesthetics tied to slavery and racial violence. Again, the point was not that these old controversies explained the film conflict. They did not. This was not just marketing, it was memory control. The point was that the public was no longer judging one press tour. It was assembling a portrait. Every resurfaced clip and past controversy became another piece of an argument about taste, privilege, and self-awareness. Algorithms flatten time. An interview from 2016, a wedding from 2012, a blog post from 2014, and a film premiere from 2024 can appear on the same screen, seconds apart, as if they are one continuous event. Context gets thinner, emotion gets stronger. By this stage, Lively was no longer only being criticized for how she promoted a movie with heavy themes. She was being reread through a wider archive. Old jokes, old interviews, old brand choices, old apologies, and old blind spots were pulled into the present and judged together. That is the danger of a public trial by feed. It can expose what traditional PR once buried, but it can also turn complexity into a single character label. The audience begins to ask less about what happened and more about who someone has always been. For this image battle, this was the moment the battlefield changed. The lawyers were still arguing over claims and counterclaims. The PR teams were still fighting over narrative control. The public had found a faster weapon, memory with a search bar, and once memory became searchable, the case was no longer contained by the film. It became a referendum on the person selling it in front of everyone online. But while the feed was building a character portrait, the court was preparing to strip the story down to legal elements. The internet had delivered its verdict. The federal court moved slower and colder. In early April 2026, Judge Louis J. Lyman narrowed Lively's case. The headline was brutal. Several of her workplace-related claims, including a federal claim tied to on-set conduct, were dismissed. But the legal reality was more precise than the headline. The court did not declare that nothing happened on set. It did not crown either side as truthful. It asked a narrower question: which claims could survive? Then the tone shifted. Public opinion wants a clear antagonist. Courtrooms want elements, statutes, jurisdiction, employment status, and proof. A story that feels obvious online can become fragile once it passes through legal architecture. One key issue was Lively's status. The court found she was an independent contractor, not an employee, for purposes of her claim under Title VII, the federal employment law that covers workplace discrimination. If the plaintiff does not fit that category, the claim can fail before a jury ever weighs the emotional force of the allegations. The decision did not make the allegations disappear. It changed what the court could do with them. That is the coldness of procedure. It does not ask whether a scandal feels morally disturbing. It asks whether the legal door being used is the right door. The ruling also addressed conduct during filming. On one contested slow dancing scene, the court noted that Baldoni was acting within a scene and that creative artists need room to experiment within an agreed script without every improvisational choice turning into an inappropriate conduct claim. That sentence traveled fast because it sounded like a judicial rebuke. But even there, the court was drawing a legal boundary, not making a documentary finding about every private moment on set. For Baldoni's side, the ruling was a public gift. It gave them language they could point to after months of being framed by Lively's complaint. The dismissal gave them grounds to say the law had rejected the sharpest claims against him. It did not need to erase every remaining dispute. In reputation terms, removing the harshest labels from the active claims against Baldoni was enough to shift the weather. For Lively's side, the ruling was damaging, but not total defeat. 3 claims survived: retaliation, aiding and abetting retaliation, and breach of a workplace-related agreement. Those remaining claims kept the case alive until settlement. They also preserved a central part of her story, that after she raised concerns, she was allegedly punished through actions tied to Wayfarer and its communications network. That is why a clean victory narrative would be false. The court cut the case down, but it did not close it. It dismissed major claims, but left others standing. It removed individual defendants from some exposure, but kept the institutional question alive. The producer credit fight also became part of the larger legal atmosphere. Earlier, Lively had sought public recognition for her producing role, including the PGA mark. Baldoni's side argued that her own materials showed major creative control, the opposite of helplessness. The court's independent contractor analysis did not need one dramatic letter to do all the work, but the broader record of control helped create the perception problem. A star publicly associated with shaping the film was also asking the court to see her through workplace vulnerability. That tension became damaging in the public case file. Online, that nuance disappeared. The law narrowed the case. The internet widened the damage. The ruling became a weapon in comment sections through algorithm amplification. Supporters of Baldoni framed it as vindication. Supporters of Lively argued that dismissals on legal grounds did not disprove misconduct and that retaliation claims still mattered. Both readings contained a piece of the truth. Neither captured the whole ruling. But public trials are not decided by whole rulings. They are decided by portable phrases. Independent contractor, acting in the scene, claims dismissed, retaliation survived. Each phrase became a tile in a different mosaic. The same order allowed one side to say the case had collapsed, and the other to say the retaliation case was still alive. That is what happens when legal documents become ammunition, not through full reading, but through selective extraction. By the time the dust settled, the courtroom had done what the feed could not. It forced the story to separate law from feeling. Feeling had judged Lively's press tour, her old interviews, and her past controversies. Law asked a different question. What can be proven under which statute against which defendant? The answer was narrower than either fandom wanted. That narrowing left both sides exposed. Baldoni could claim relief from the most damaging label, but his reputation had already been dragged through months of allegation. Lively could keep parts of her case alive, but the public had watched the court remove its loudest claims. The legal battlefield was smaller now, and smaller battlefields often lead to one thing: settlement. The smaller legal battlefield did not produce a final public victory. It produced a closed door. On May 4th, 2026, Lively, Baldoni, Wayfarer, and the remaining parties reached a settlement before trial. The terms were not disclosed. There was no jury verdict, no witness stand collapse, no final courtroom scene where one side was publicly declared clean and the other destroyed. The war ended the way many Hollywood wars end, with a statement, sealed terms, and carefully measured language about closure. Here, precision matters. A settlement is not a confession. It is not an apology. It is not proof that every allegation was true or false. It is a decision to stop litigating before the machinery reveals more, costs more, or damages more. For the public, that kind of ending feels unsatisfying. After months of filings, screenshots, theories, and moral certainty, the audience wants a final score. But confidential settlements are designed to deny the audience that pleasure. They close the courtroom door while leaving the public case file unfinished. And the damage was already visible. For Baldoni, the cost had arrived long before settlement. In December 2024, after Lively filed her complaint and the New York Times published its report, WME dropped him as a client. WME later denied claims that Reynolds or Lively pressured the agency to do so. But the result was the same in public terms. One of Hollywood's most powerful representation machines stepped away from him at the height of the scandal. Then came the symbolic losses. Vital Voices rescinded an award it had given Baldoni for advocacy on behalf of vulnerable audiences. Liz Plank, his longtime Man Enough co-host, announced she was leaving the podcast after the allegations and fallout. Each development carried its own context. None of them alone proved the case against him. But in reputation terms, they formed a ledger: agency, honor, platform, distance. That is how institutional risk works. Companies and organizations do not always wait for verdicts. They move when association becomes expensive. A person can deny allegations, countersue, release documents, and still find doors closing, because the controversy itself has become the liability. Baldoni could point to dismissed claims and public support online. He could argue that the narrative against him had been engineered, but the industry had already priced the risk. The stain did not need to be legally final to become professionally real. Lively's damage ledger looked different. The movie was a financial success. It ends with us earned roughly $350 million worldwide against a far smaller production budget. On paper, that should have been a clean victory. A popular novel turned into a profitable film led by a star with fashion reach, brand power, and producer credit. But reputation is not the same currency as box office. The press tour had made Lively's personal brands part of the story. Blake Brown, Betty Buzz, and Betty Booze were no longer sitting outside the controversy. They were folded into the audience's critique of tone, timing, and cross-promotion. Critics didn't need sales data to create damage. They needed a feeling that a movie about surviving a harmful relationship had been used to sell a lifestyle. That feeling followed her. The old interview clips, plantation wedding criticism, preserve backlash, and legal filings all merged into a harder public image. Not every viewer accepted it. Many argued she had raised legitimate workplace-related concerns and became the target of an alleged retaliation effort. But the soft, effortless it girl aura had cracked. Once that aura cracks, a brand built on charm starts paying interest. The settlement did not restore that aura. It only stopped the formal case. That is the bitter accounting of this battle. Baldoni lost institutional safety before a final verdict. Lively lost public softness, even while parts of her retaliation case survived. The film made money, but the story around it became toxic. The legal system narrowed the claims, but the internet widened the damage. If anyone came close to winning, it was the machine around them. Studios had a profitable release. Outlets had months of traffic. Platforms had clips, stitched takes, and comment wars. Crisis professionals became characters in the story they were hired to control. The people at the center carried the bill long after everyone else moved on to another scandal. Nobody walked away untouched. The studio could still count revenue. The lawyers could close files. The PR teams could draft language about moving forward. But the audience had learned something more durable than any verdict. Image is not a possession. It is a fragile agreement between the person selling it and the public willing to believe it. Once that agreement breaks, even settlement cannot put it back together. The party was over. The case was closed. But the narrative machine had already escaped the court file. By the time the settlement papers were signed, the algorithm had already moved on. The movie had ended. The public judgment had not. The people inside it keep living with the damage, but the crowd does not stay. The feed scrolls forward. A new scandal rises. A new clip gets slowed down. A new face is placed on trial before breakfast. What remains behind is quieter. It Ends With Us was sold as a story about survival, healing, and the courage to break a cycle. Yet for many viewers, the film is now remembered less for Lily's escape than for the machinery around its release. The floral marketing, the cocktail menu, the missing director, the lawsuits, the texts, the clips, the claims, the counterclaims. That is not a clean moral ending. It is messier than that. The settlement did not hand the public a final truth. It left something colder, proof that once a human story enters the entertainment machine, every side can turn it into leverage. Studios need a campaign. Stars need an image. Lawyers need claims. Publicists need timing. Platforms need conflict. Fans need someone to believe and someone to push back against. The story itself becomes the last thing protected. Picture the basement after the premiere. The lights are off. The velvet ropes upstairs have been packed away. In the corner, a floral dress lies folded over a chair, bright fabric drained of meaning under the emergency glow. It was once the symbol of an invitation. Come with your friends, wear something pretty, buy into the feeling. Now it looks like evidence, not evidence of one person's guilt, evidence of how easily painful realities can be packaged until the packaging is all anyone remembers. That is the legacy narrative machines leave behind. In modern Hollywood, reputation is not what you own. It is what survives contact with lawyers, headlines, leaked messages, fan edits, and the feed. And once the feed decides what your story means, even the truth has to fight for screen time. So keep watching the frame. Watch who stands in it. Watch who gets cut out. Because in Hollywood, the final cut is not always in the movie. It is in the memory the public is trained to keep long after the credits have gone black.